All right, good afternoon to everyone. Okay, I'm not sure if people can hear me. I think I should. Just check this. Dr. Tendekai, I'm gonna unmute you now. Let me try to look for you here. I need you to say something.
Can you hear me?
Right. Can you hear me? Great, lovely. Okay. All right, welcome and good afternoon to everyone. We want to thank you for coming through to the program. We are about to start the program. We'll start off with the word of prayer. Our speaker is already here. I'll do the announcements, and quickly after the announcements, we'll give it over to him. Let us pray. This afternoon, Father, we want to thank you again for the life that you've offered unto us. We come before your throne because we don't know where else to go. Very grateful that you are amazing and always will be. We are coming now because we're going to learn about a very critical part about our lives. There's Dr. Tendekai, your child, ready to take us through what he has learned and what you've revealed unto him. May he speak words of wisdom as pertains the physical that affects the spiritual. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, thank you so much. I will quickly start off with the announcements. Welcome to the Facebook family as well. I'll pin myself now, so at least I can be on the spotlight. And after that, I'll give the spotlight to our speaker of the day. Here are the announcements for this particular coming couple of Sabbaths that are there. Just in case you don't know who we are, this is 230 Conversations, and welcome to where we talk about thought facilitation and discussions as well. That is what we're all about in this particular platform. We are on Facebook. You can find us there, follow us and like our page. There you can get more information about the coming programs, inspirational stuff. And also if you are coming from a certain place, certain church, you want to post your event, you're free to post it on this 230 Conversations. It will reach quite a number of people. We are under our parent, our mother, we call them our mother, the SDA_advertised group. That is where we're currently also are live streaming from. So please, by all means, also follow this particular group so that at least you can get to see, find out what we are doing at any particular moment. SDA_advertising. We are very grateful to this platform for allowing us to go live on their page. We are also on the Instagram page, SDA_advertise. If you have programs that you want to advertise so they can get quite a number of people to look for them or at least know about them, please go to SDA_advertise. We get to get these programs as well. The followers are more than what you're looking at right there. So please be one of those, add yourself in. We'll be glad and help and grateful that you're there. 230 Conversations is on Facebook. You can find us on Facebook. Notice that whatever we're doing today, or whatever we do every Sabbath at 2:30, we are going to make sure that we upload it before the end of the Sabbath. As soon as we're done, I get down to downloading this thing and then uploading it on YouTube. If not, maybe by tomorrow, it will be there. So the program that we're having today with our Dr. Tendekai Mahlanza is beautiful, and we're going to upload this as well. And also note that all the previous topics that we've done, discussions, presentations, they're all there. Please go and check them out. I've been running through some of them that we did last year. Lovely ones, beautiful. Go check that out on YouTube. 230 conversations. 230 conversations as a baby. All right, our firstborn child is the 9:30 Sabbath school lesson. So every Sabbath at 9:30, we have a lesson. So today's lesson was being done by me. And we also do it with Leander. Leander is going to be coming through next week, and then moving on the other week, it will be me. So covenant faith, that's what we're talking about in lesson number 12. Speaking about this, if you want the new quarterly that's coming up, the study guide that's coming for the next 3 months, because this is lesson number 12. Next week is the last lesson of this quarter. Then we go to the next quarter. Please do send us a message. I'll be able to send this to you. It's a PDF version, the teacher's version of the quarterly. You can get it, or you can download it. I think this website is called ssnet.org. So you can check that out on Google, download it for yourself. That's still fine. Okay, the men of the hour were here to learn more about this genetically modified organisms, GMOs. Dr. Tendekai Mahlanza is here with us. Okay, so to authenticate the speaker so that we know, when I was speaking to him right now, he was like, you know what, I need you to talk about my bio so that people know that I didn't Google this stuff. I like that. Didn't Google this stuff. So here's our man. He has a PhD in plant biotechnology, works as a researcher at the Agricultural Research Council, where his research interests include using genetic engineering for developing disease-resistant crops. He serves on the Department of Agriculture's GMO Advisory Subcommittee. Again, beautiful. He's a member of the Kempton Park Central SDA Church. That's his biography right there. Now, next week, who are we having? Henrietta Coupe. This one is a chief social worker at Lifeline South Africa. Definitely comes out on TV quite a lot. And she's coming to be with us here under the theme, Skeletons in the Closet. These ones come out, so please just check it out there. It's one about how we can Christianly fight, learn, and accept the skeletons in the closet and help and ask God to help us through as we fight and win over the battles that we go through. Right. The month of July is filled up because the month of July is a marriage month. So on that particular month of July, we're speaking about serious marriage themes. And to kickstart that, Zolani Mpumuche, on the 3rd of July, love, marriage, and divorce, a man's perspective. We'll speak about such serious topics. This man has gone through divorce, knows what's going through. He's going to give us Christian examples of how he's overcome that, how he's able to live on a day-to-day basis, and what lessons he learned from that. That's a man's perspective. We're going to give it to women's perspective. That's on the 10th of July. These people are not afraid to talk about their situations. We will seem more happy. Also gone through something similar, love, marriage, and divorce from a woman's perspective. The other week on the 17th, guess what? Mamno Kanyo Ndlovu on a beautiful topic, submission in marriage, the biblical narrative and modern trends. What does that mean? Who's supposed to submit? Is it gender sensitive? And all those kind of things. So that's what we're going to be talking about there. The other week, love in marriage, the most violent act. We speak about abuse, physical, emotional, when we talk about this particular topic. God bless those people that are willing to talk about what they've gone through, and more importantly, the lessons that they've learned and how we can avoid it or also help ourselves to be changed if we're going through such. Okay, last part of July, who do we have? Couple goals, the joys of marriage, something more positive, something more exciting. Ruth and Valentine going to take us through this particular topic, the couple goals, the joys of marriage. Okay, we'll go up as far as August. Now, August is a very beautiful month because it's the month whereby it's a women's month. And so who are we having? Women throughout the whole time. Now, they're still praying about their topics. That's why it's written TBA. On the 7th of August, Usam Mukasa taking us through. The topic is not TBA. to be announced. That's what it stands for. So it's going to take us through right there. Let's pray for her as well. On the other week, there she is coming through to take us through another topic there. We've got Unos Pio Baloi taking us through right there as well. Then on the 4th of September, we start off with the month of theology. And who are we starting with? Dr. Admara Nube. How are we saved? That's what we're going to be talking about there. We continue with theology situations on the 11th of September. Love the topic. We men and we men. Manhood from a biblical lenses. We finish up again the third week of it. Pastor Kaya Mieza, our pastor here, taking us through a critical topic, the essence of giving. We'll give you more of this particular posters as our poster, a lady, Ukosi, does them for us. We want to fill up the rest of the year, so now we're working on October and November and December to finish up the rest of the year. Okay, next week, 9:30, this is what we're having is our lesson. The last lesson of the quarter, the new covenant life. So please make sure that you are there into the new covenant life on the last Sabbath of this quarter next week. So please read it, 9:30, we're starting. Okay, last but not least, we have an airtime fund, an airtime contribution fund. We buy airtime for those that want to join these programs. So if you want to join the program, please do not hesitate. By all means, contact me now. That's my name, Umtandazo, 0739748498. Ask me for airtime data for this particular programs that we have. We'll give you that. If you want to contribute, and we really are asking for contributions, we're running low on funds. We've been running low for almost a while now, for a long time now. So please do, if you want, please do contribute. Actually, also you can use that number, but do contact me. I'm always the primary source of airtime in this platform. Thank you so much. Thank you. May God bless you as we get ready to start our lesson right now. Okay, I'll pin my doctor here, and he's going to take us through. I will keep quiet and disable my video. Now, please, just as a disclaimer, here's a lot of things to show us, and we need to learn. It will be well for you to get a pen and a paper somewhere on the side. When I spoke to him earlier, I said, you know what, we're going to go through a lecture, and he's ready to get us to know, really, and learn. So prepare yourself to engage your mind and learn as much as you can. Otherwise, God bless you. Thank you so much, Doctor. Can you hear me? Let me hear you one more time. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Great, man. Great. All right. Listen, let me pin you through quickly here. Let me replace the pin. There you are. You're now the man of the moment. Then I'm going to mute myself here. Then let me allow you to be able to share the screen. All right. So try that. Let me see before I go off.
All right.
Try to share.
No, I'm trying to share. Okay. There we go.
Okay. How's that?
Yep. It's coming through. Can you see my screen now?
Lovely. We can see that. Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, it's up to you now. You can take us through. God bless you. Amen.
Thank you, Mtandazo, and thanks again for inviting me. And hello to everyone. Yeah, it's quite fitting that we discuss this topic. I'm sure all of you accept that it's a controversial topic, and that then necessitates for us to discuss it. It's when we discuss controversial topics, that's when we make progress. Right. And so today we'll be talking about GMOs as announced, and we're going to be touching on essentially, first of all, what they are, because the controversy around GMOs starts when we don't understand what they are, and then that builds up to speculation on, that then goes to other, speculations on what they are, and more importantly, if they're safe, because they are part of, what we eat. And so we're going to discuss, that part. And these two things, what they are and if they're safe, you appreciate that they are fundamentally scientific questions. It's similar, for example, in the current time we're in, if we're discussing if the COVID vaccine is safe, that is a scientific question. And if we then remove ourselves from, the foundational aspects of it, which is the science, and we don't understand that, then that's when you start to, to give ourselves into things like conspiracies and so forth and so forth. So it's important, and I'm glad that we have this opportunity to discuss, what they are and if they are safe. And we're going to touch on some fundamental, it's going to get technical at some point. Please forgive me. I'll try and keep it simple. And then obviously we'll touch at the beginning and the end of the presentation, we'll touch on some Christian perspectives to the presentation. Yeah, like I've got limited time, like it's been said. So I'll forgive me if I don't want to rush. I'll try and go at a reasonable pace, but I've got quite a bit to go through. My screen is not, I can't go on to the next slide in Tandazo. I'm not too sure what's happening. Okay, let me just do that. Please confirm if it's go to the next slide. Tandazo,
Yeah,
can
we're
you?
good.
Yeah, okay, great. So this is basically,
Let me give you the hosting abilities. I'll make you the host, man. I'll make you the host, right? Yeah, that way you have more power than I do.
okay.
So when you're done, I'll reclaim the host anytime that you want me to. Okay, cool.
Perfect. Yeah, awesome. So basically, this is what you can look forward to through the presentation. I will not go through it now because of time, but that's what you can look forward to. And let me start. Let me start at the beginning. That's always a good place to start, right? At creation, just to give our discussion some context. And when God created everything, we're well aware that God said everything was good. In fact, He says that it was very good, right? So creation was perfect, and then after sin, that's when we problem started. And not only was man defiled in terms of his nature, but even creation itself suffered the consequences of sin. And sometimes we do not often appreciate that, but when we look at the world around us, and today we're talking about, even from my background in agriculture and so forth, we can see the consequences of sin, be it the diseases or the pests, the floods, and the climate changing around us. All that is the consequence of sin. That was not part of the perfect world that God created. And one day, the earth will be restored, and we look forward to that day, of course. And 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 so, man has had to live in such a world, a world that has fallen. He's had to sustain himself and contend with such an environment. And so he has had to be inventive around the way, for example, he produces his food, right? Around the way that, if he encounters disease in his body, how can he treat himself? You know, and so it's the Bible says that through painful toil you will eat from it all the days of your life. And so man has had to find ways and means to contend with, be it drought, be it pests and so forth. That has required some inventions. And so if you look at throughout the ages, for thousands of years, man has been inventive. Is tried to harness nature to develop technology to assist them post-fall environment, be it in medicine. you know there's a certain time in the world where you had certain diseases, you're condemned to death, and some of those diseases are no longer there. Be it in engineering, and of course, like we'll be talking today in agriculture. Man has advanced, and that is largely to deal with these consequences of a fallen world. And through these advancements and through these technologies, man has been able to do a lot of good. And indeed, if it is within our power to do good, we should not withhold that. We should act. And even Christ himself, through the Holy Spirit, he was empowered to go around doing good, right? Be it healing people, and also that it did, and most importantly, saving us from sin. It was within his power to do that, and he did not withhold that. And so, as we've gone on through time, and as we've developed and gained certain capacities, we've acquired certain, we should not withhold those capacities in doing good around us. And like I mentioned, an excellent example, many diseases have bedeviled the world throughout the ages. If you look at smallpox, for example, millions of people died. Just to give you an insight, right now, about 2 people out of 100 die from COVID, right? Smallpox, 30 people out of 100 would die from smallpox, and millions of people, died, throughout the world. It was a disease that has been around for thousands of years, right? Then vaccination came up. In fact, the first vaccine was a smallpox vaccine. Even Ellen White took the smallpox vaccine. And in 1980, because of this advancement vaccination, smallpox has been totally eliminated in the world, and no one dies of smallpox today, right? And so that's an example of the power to do good. And we need to appreciate that as we continue to discuss such topics, right? And when we look in agriculture as well, we have advanced throughout the ages, be it in mechanization, from ox-drawn farming implements to tractors, and today we've got GPS guided tractors and combine harvesters and so forth. We continue to advance. And even when you talk of plant breeding, as we'll be talking in more detail today, we have advanced, since domestication of certain crops. Certain crops were only in the wild, and we brought them into the domestic setting where we grow them for food, right? Until the laws of genetics, where we understood, in the early 20th centuries, hybrid breeding became really a part of how food is grown. And if you then go into the mid in the 50s, where there was a green revolution, where hybrids played a major role in bringing many people out of starvation. Yields increased because of our understanding of how to breed crops. And in the 50s as well, when the structure of DNA was eventually discovered, that opened doors to a whole new world, and which eventually led to, in the mid 90s, when GMOs came onto the scene. And today we continue to advance. Today we're talking about things like gene editing, right? Which is continuing, which is now the second generation of GMOs. In fact, when we talk of gene editing, last year the Nobel Prize winners of last year were the inventors of CRISPR-Cas gene editing. So we continue to advance, and that is something that is not unique to agriculture. In any field, whether it's in medicine and engineering, we continue to advance. And so another context we need to appreciate is that, currently we are about over 7 billion people. The population continues to grow, and it's estimated by 2050 will be about almost 10 billion people. And so there is a demand on food that we have, and we need to produce more food in an increasingly harsher environment. You appreciate that, rainfall patterns are getting more erratic, temperatures are rising. Excuse me. And so we need to produce food to sustain the human population in a harsher environment, and therefore that then necessitates us to come up with ways and means and be inventive in how we meet those demands. And so therefore we need to talk about GMOs, right? Because they are an essential part of our livelihoods, of our being, because they are part of the food we eat, and food is obviously a huge part of our families and who we are. And we need to talk about them as well, because like I mentioned earlier on, it's a controversial topic that unfortunately has been bedeviled by a lot of controversy, lots of information and disinformation. Even the imagery that is used to depict GMOs is quite misleading, like I've just given some examples here. So we need to talk about this and put the correct picture into the discussion, so that when we are making decisions, or when we are eating what we're eating, for example, the GMOs that we have on the market, we do that in a well-informed space. And also, unfortunately, when GMOs came into the scene, you might be familiar with this kind of phenomenon in the current COVID context, where scientists sometimes are not good at communicating the science, and so when GMOs came out, unfortunately, it was a similar case where scientists did not quite, communicate to the general public what GMOs are about, and that then lent itself to people speculating, and hence, the false, narratives that you might have, or the wrong picture that you might see around GMO. So we need to talk about that and kind of correct some of those misconceptions. And also, unfortunately, because of the corporate practices of some of the big multinational, mainly seed companies that are involved in GMOs, some of their practices, have not been desirable, and they've lent themselves to a lot of criticism, and they've tainted the whole thing about GMOs, and also the social political interests. GMOs have been entangled in this, and especially here in Africa, they're viewed, in the lines of, this anti-West sentiment. They're viewed as a tool from the West, to try, maybe us Africans were guinea pigs, and so forth. I'm sure you've had that kind of narrative before, and so it's also entangled in the politics. But we need to come back to the fundamentals, and discuss what exactly they are and what they're about. Of course, controversy, like I mentioned, protests around them, for various reasons, some of them which I've mentioned here. And so we need to kind of demystify and come back to, is it really necessary that these GMOs are controversial? Are they of any use, if at all? So what are they? What are GMOs? And we'll spend a bit of time on this aspect, which will launch us into a discussion, later on, if we understand what they are. And so obviously GMOs, genetically modified organisms. And so these are organisms that are produced by producing foreign DNA. By foreign, probably mean by from a different species, right? And they're introduced using genetic engineering into a species, in a certain species. So for example, if you've got maize and you take a gene from a virus, for example, through genetic engineering, then that maize then becomes a GMO. And I'll elaborate on this in a few moments. And of course, when we say genetic modification, right, in this context, because modification can mean various things, right? But in the context of GMOs, we are referring to modification in the sense of genetic engineering, because the genetics of crops and many organisms have been modified in some sense for thousands of years, right? But in the current context, we are referring to genetic engineered organisms, right? And so, like I mentioned, for thousands of years, the genetics of crops has been changing, right? I don't know how many of us here are in, have got parents or grandparents or know someone in the rural areas, when they used to, when they farm their crop, what they used to do is to save seed for the next season, right? They'd go into the field and look for the best looking plants, and then they save that seed and use seed for those plants for the next season, right? And so doing that over and over and over, it's a form of genetic selection that over time modifies and changes the genetics of these crops. And in this sense, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking of GMOs, right? This is just normal, breeding, if you like, right? Inadvertently, as it might be, and over, through time, scientists, like I mentioned earlier on, then deliberately started breeding crops. So plant breeders deliberately breed crops with desirable traits, and especially hybrids, where they take two parents with desirable characteristics, whatever characteristics they might want, and then they cross pollinate them. This is almost sexual reproduction of in plants. They cross pollinate them, and then they select for the progeny, or the offspring that has the desirable traits. So again, this is plant breeding is these are not GMOs, right? These are not GMOs. In fact, most of our food, most of the crops that we know, the seed is produced, via normal plant breeding. One of the most famous examples, I mentioned the Green Revolution. If you look at the Green Revolution that happened in Asia, and South America in the 50s, especially in Asia, there's this. If you just Google IR8, you come across this very famous maize rice variety, which helped millions of people come out of starvation. This is when, you know, plant breeders mated these two different rice cultivars to come up with that. And their yield came from about 2 tons per hectare to more than 6 tons per hectare, you know, and millions of people were saved from, you know, poverty and starvation because they also farm for subsistence. They sell what they, you know. So again, uh, this hybrid is not a GMO. That's not what we're talking about. There's been a narrative out there that is kind of tried to say hybrids are GMOs. Hybrids are not GMOs, right? So just to get that out of the way. And so, like I mentioned, over time, the genetics of crops without even genetic engineering has changed. You know, if you look at whether be it in maize, you know, in wheat, and rice, banana, wild banana has had seed, and now the banana we know does not have seed. That is through breeding, and this is not genetic modification in the sense of GMOs. And we're probably are more familiar with seedless grapes, right? Probably some of our kids will never know that grapes once had seed, but again through breeding, we're now talking of seedless grapes. And here again, changing genetics, but this is still not yet GMOs, right? So when we come to try and understand GMOs, it is fundamental that we understand this point. It's fundamental, it's important that we understand this aspect, and we'll get a little bit technical from here onwards. So for whatever trait in any organism, whatever trait you get, there is a protein that is responsible for that trait, right? And the organism gets the instruction to make that protein from DNA, right? DNA organized into a gene. So for every, you know, for most genes, majority of the genes, right, there's a protein, right? And that protein leads to a certain trait, right? So if you want to give a certain organism a certain trait, you know, you then need to understand what proteins are responsible for that trait and what gene or genes. Some proteins have a number of genes that are responsible for them. And therefore, if you take the gene, right, you're able to get a certain trait, right? So this is fundamental to GMOs, right? We were transferring certain genes to get certain traits, right? And DNA basically is a sequence of four letters, if you like, to make it simple. Let's call them letters. The sequence of 4 letters. So I always say that one of the most you know, profound evidence of there being a creator, of there being intelligent design, is that all living things at the biological level, all living things come down to these 4 letters, right? These 4. So every, for example, if it's maize, if it's a human being in the fundamental biological sense, the difference is the sequence of these 4 letters, right? And so if we take the sum total of let's say the DNA in any organism, right? As a book, right? And for example, that book in humans has 3.5 billion letters, right? And the sum total of DNA in organisms is called a genome, right? And that genome is divided into chromosomes. And if we like, we can think of those chromosomes as chapters in this book, right? Um, and those chromosomes have genes, right? And if you like, these genes can be paragraphs in these chapters, right? And we can further look at these genes. These genes are divided into, they've got, in the most basic sense, 3 parts: a promoter, coding sequence, and a terminator, right? So for us to understand what GMOs are, when we're doing normal breeding, what is essentially happening is the parents are passing on chromosomes to their offspring, right? And when we talk about genetic engineering, it's basically when we're operating at this level, excuse me, we're operating at this level where we're taking parts of genes and transferring them to other organisms, right? So essentially, it's like we are taking sentences from a book, right? And transfer and pasting those sentences into another book, right? The language in these two books is still English. It's English in both of, you can take that sentence and paste it into the other book, and the sentence might still make sense. You might, make some edits here and there, but the sentence still makes sense. And what I'm fundamentally trying to say here is that the genetic code in all organisms is basically the same. So if you take DNA from a virus and put it into maize is still able to understand what that piece of DNA means. And so basically what happens when you come to breeding crops is, for example, you might have a maize variety, for example, that is adapted to local climate and soils and so forth. But it might have a problem, for example, it being susceptible to insects, right? So normally in the conventional plant breeding, what breeders would do is to look if there is another maize variety else, it might be maybe in South Africa, for example, elsewhere, and look if there's another maize variety, but maybe this variety is not. I see their hands. May I request that I go through the presentation and then maybe we come back to the questions. So you might have another maize variety that is not probably adapted to local conditions, that has resistance to the insects. It might have genes that confer resistance to the insects, right? So breeders would then, cross-pollinate these two parents, right, to get offspring that is adapted to local conditions and also has, the insect resistance. And in this case, what is passed on to the offspring is the chromosomes, right? Is the chromosome. So the whole chapter in this instance in the book is pasted into the other book, right? But sometimes it is possible, it is often possible that the trait that you're looking for, in this case, insect resistance, might not exist in another maize variety, right? It might exist maybe in another plant species, also, different plant species, or even in a different organism like a bacterium or a virus, right? And with those genes that you want, right? But the problem then is maize and sunflower are not sexually compatible, right? And definitely maize and bacteria and virus are definitely not sexually compatible. So how then do you access these genes and the trait that is associated, with those genes to benefit, maize in this instance, right? And so that is when genetic engineering comes, right? That is when genetic engineering comes in, where you've got the genes that confer a certain trait, right? They produce a certain protein to confer a certain trait, like I mentioned earlier on. So genetic engineers would copy that gene, for example, from bacteria. They do this by cloning, right? And then they would paste it into, for example, maize, right? And they do this by a process called transformation. And so that now the maize might be able to produce this protein that the bacteria produces, which can kill insects, so that the maize can now produce that protein. And to enable the maize to produce enough of this protein to be effective against insects, scientists might also take other sequences from viruses, for example, and introduce them into the maize. Viruses are very good at driving production of, or what we call expression of genes, right? They've got certain sequences that's why viruses are very dangerous, right? Viruses are quite at the front of our mind at the moment. That's why they're very dangerous. They can come into our bodies and manipulate our bodies, specifically for this reason. They've got certain genes or DNA sequences that enable them to drive production of proteins. So scientists also take some of those sequences and insert them there to drive the production of these proteins at a level that enables to kill insects, in the example shown here. And what they also do is, together with these genes, right, they also introduce genes from bacteria that, for example, confer antibiotic resistance. And this is to enable them to be able to identify which cells of, in this case, maize, have taken up the foreign DNA. And this is an important for me to mention this. I'm laboring to mention this because it's got implications on the safety, obviously, of GMOs. Now, if we have antibiotic resistance genes in the maize that we're eating, the potential question on safety that has been asked is it possible that now when we eat the maize and the maize is in our stomachs and maybe our gut is infected by some harmful bacteria, can these antibiotic resistance genes be transferred to these bacteria such that if we take antibiotics, the antibiotics are ineffective against this bacteria? So there's been extensive research on that that has shown that there is no transfer of these genes and maybe in the maize that you've eaten to bacteria in your tummy that might be harmful, right? So, and in fact, what they've also tried to do now is to use different antibiotics when it comes to producing GMOs, different from those that are used, for example, in medicine. So in a conceptual sense, this is what a GMO is, right? Where we've transferred by non-sexual means, by, if you want, copying and pasting certain genes into a different species so that we can access, the traits that some of these organisms have to offer. And so if we just consider for a moment the GMOs that we actually have in South Africa. So, research into GMOs in South Africa has been going on since the 80s. And the first GM crop that was tested was cotton in these are field tests done in 1990. And in 1994, that's when the first GM crop in the world, which was the flavor saver tomato, was introduced commercially in the US. It had a long shelf life. And in 1994, now you appreciate that South Africa was quite ahead. And the point I'm trying to bring here is that South Africa has been considering the issues of GMOs for a long time. And in 97, we already had the GMO Act, right? Legislation passed to govern the use of GMOs in South Africa. This was the first in Africa, and even way ahead of some countries, developed countries, throughout the world. And then in the same year, the GM cotton was released commercially in South Africa. Then in 98, that's when we had the first GM maize. It's called the BT maize. It had insect resistance, where genes from a bacteria called Bacillus thuringiensis was introduced into maize and to confer insect resistance. Then in 2000, soybean was also commercially released. So what we currently have in South Africa is 100% of the cotton produced or cultivated in South Africa is genetically modified. 98% of the soybean is genetically modified. And 95% of the maize that we grow in South Africa is genetically modified. And we import, there's one variety of rice and one variety of canola that has been licensed for import into South Africa. And if you look at where South Africa is, in terms of hectareage, in the top 10 of countries that grow GMOs in the world. So the crops that we have that are genetically modified in South Africa are maize, cotton. Both of them have insect and herbicide tolerance, and then soybean that has herbicide tolerance, right? These are the only three crops that are genetically modified that are grown in South Africa. And then we import one cultivar of canola and one cultivar of rice, both have herbicide tolerance. And the genetic components that were introduced into these crops came from soil bacteria, plant viruses, and other plants. So there are no genetic components of animal origin. And that's important for me to clarify, because that's where some of the concern comes from, where people say, if now you've taken genes from a cow and you put it in my soybean, am I still vegetarian, right? So there are no genes or genetic components of animal origin in any crops in South Africa, for that matter, in the world, right? And just to show you the benefits of these technologies, if you look at insect resistance, so this is just a comparison of genetically modified maize modified for insect resistance versus that is not being modified. So you can clearly see the difference. Now, because the maize is able to produce its own insecticide, if you like, right, then it's able to withstand damage by insect pests. Same thing with cotton. If you compare genetically modified insect-resistant cotton versus unmodified, and you can see here the damage that the cotton boll causes in this cotton. And soybean, that is herbicide tolerance. So with herbicide tolerance, the whole idea is when you introduce the gene into cotton, that enables the cotton, into soybean, that enables it to break down the herbicide when the plant is sprayed with the herbicide, such that a field of soybean can be sprayed with the herbicide, and the soybean is able to withstand herbicide damage, and the weeds around it, around the soybean, they die, right? So now farmers don't have to be weeding and so forth. This, in fact, helps to do what is called no-till agriculture. They don't have to till the land as often. They don't have to make the soil loose, and that also has got downstream benefits of less soil erosion and so forth. So that's just some of the benefits of GM crops. And then, because the crops are producing its own, for example, insect resistance protein, farmers use less pesticides, right? There's less damage from weeds and insects, so it increases yields, and increased yields can translate to increased income for farmers. And that's quite important, especially when it comes to African context, where farmers farm for subsistence, right? But unfortunately, some of these crops have not been adopted for various reasons. But that's the potential that that can be realized from using GM crops. So just to go into some of the other products that I'm trying to watch my time. Some of the other products that are available in South Africa. So very important to mention, there are currently no animal GM products, genetically modified products in South Africa. And I'll repeat that. There are currently no animal products. There is no genetically modified beef. There is no genetically modified chicken, no genetically modified whatever kind of meat that you like, that is available in South Africa. In fact, in the world, there's only one animal food product that is available. That is genetically modified salmon that was only approved in 2015 that is a, it was modified with the growth hormone. It's able to grow throughout the year and so forth. And that's the only animal product throughout the world that is currently available. So if there's any narrative that says they are genetically modified chicken that has two heads and four drumsticks, that is definitely false. Of course, I'm exaggerating to make my point. Um, and so, so people in the agriculture setting have kind of felt that GMOs in agriculture has been unfairly targeted, and that's where you kind of start to see the controversy arise, because in pharmaceuticals, GMOs are used extensively. They're used widely, in production of insulin, anti-cancer agents, growth factors, and so forth. In fact, the COVID vaccine that we're talking about is produced from GMOs. It's produced from genetic engineering, right? So basically, the whole idea is, in fact, all the insulin that we have, if you're diabetic and you're taking insulin, it's been produced from, by genetic engineering, where they take the human insulin gene, put into a bacteria, the bacteria becomes sort of a factory and produce the protein, the insulin. And obviously this bacteria is grown in these fermenters. And then, the protein will be harvested and purified into insulin that you then take. So GMOs are widely available in pharmaceuticals as well. Vaccines for poultry, for against some really devastating diseases in chicken, Marek's and Newcastle's disease. There are vaccines that are used to, produced by genetic engineering against those diseases. So just to move to the hazards, risks, and safety of GMOs. Now, it's important for us to understand hazards, right? And by that we mean the potential to cause harm, right? And so that we can then also establish what are the risks, right? And but then we then refer to the likelihood of that potential harm to be realized under specific circumstances, such that we can try and mitigate against that risks, or get to a condition of being safe, right? Because in honesty, very few things are without hazard. If anything at all is without hazard, right? I can imagine that there are definitely hazards to flying in a metal tube at 35,000 feet at 900 kilometers an hour, right? I can imagine hazards that are associated with that, right? But the risk is actually quite minimal, under the defined circumstances that we fly at, right? The risk is quite minimal, such that flying is the safest mode of transport. I always say that you're safer in an aeroplane to Polokwane, if you like, than you are if you're doing 120 on the N1 in Limpopo, right? And so we need to understand that even things like drinking water, and I'm not talking, and I'm referring it towards water, clean water, if you drink too much water in a very short period of time, that can affect your electrolyte balance, affect your nervous system, and you can die. People have died from that. But the risk is very minimal because it's very difficult to drink. I think it's about 3-4 liters of water in about an hour or two. And this is especially people that are after exercise, that are most susceptible to that, right? So very few things are without risk, right? And also when we also come to GMOs, we need to approach them with the same mindset if we're going to be fair, that there will be hazards, but what are the risks, and what are we safe under the defined circumstances? And if we look at in South Africa, there is an extensive process to evaluate GMOs. There's an extensive process to evaluate GMOs to make sure that they're safe, right? So any company that wants to produce GMOs, release them in fact, not even just to do experiments on GMOs in the country, just to work on GMOs in a lab, right? and to eventually, and even to import and to eventually release them, excuse me, into the market, an application has to be submitted to the Department of Agriculture, right? The Department of Agriculture has got a body and an advisory committee of scientists that then look at the application, right, and look at the technical issues of the GMO. And these are extensive applications. I'll go into some of the details just now, just to give you insight that GMOs are not just brought to the market. And then the advisory committee gives its recommendation to an executive council, which is composed of officials from a variety of government departments, from agriculture, health, environment, science and technology, trade and industry, labor, and so forth and so forth, right? And then that executive council committee goes out into the public. So, for example, they publish a notice in the newspaper to get public comment on the intention of releasing a certain GMO, right? And then once it's gotten that comment, then the executive council issues a permit. And this is an extensive process. So it's not like, if there's a GMO, it's just released into the what do you call it, into the market. And just to give you insight into the process, right? What is considered in these applications, right? Because now we're talking about safety. Are they safe, right? So the issues, these are some of the factors that are considered. Let me go through them quickly one by one. So, for example, genetic characterization. So the scientists would consider what genes have been introduced. Have they introduced genes from pigs into maize? We need to know that if that's what they've done. What is the process that has been used? Have they used antibiotic genes like I've mentioned before? By the process of introducing those genes into maize, for example, have they then disrupted any other aspects of the genetics of the maize? And then they also need to give details of, okay, how can we detect? Give us, details of a protocol we can use to detect the genes that you've introduced. So the applicant needs to put all that in there, right? Then there's phenotypic characterizations, like where they need now to say, okay, at what levels are the proteins that you've introduced being produced in the plant, and is that production of the protein stable across many generations? Is it stable? And if any other features of for example, the maize plant has been affected by introducing these genes, and then they do comparisons here, field comparisons between a genetically modified the genetically modified crop and the non-genetically modified crop, and they do comparisons, and often what they want to see is that all the other features are comparable, except for the one obviously that has been tried to be introduced. That all the other features of the crop are similar, right? Nothing has been adversely affected. And then they do toxicity assessments, right? Is the introduced protein potentially toxic to human beings, right? So usually what they do is they take the pure protein and feed it to mice and see if they get any adverse effects, right? Then they look at also the DNA and protein sequences of these genes that are introduced to see if they're similar to any known toxins, right? So there are databases of known toxins that you can then compare these proteins and the DNA, the genes too. And also, if how long has this gene been used? Does it have a history of safe use? So, for example, I said here in South Africa, in 1998, that's when BT maize was introduced into the market, and now we're approaching 25 years, and there has not been a report that is directly linked to the use of BT. So they'll say it has a history of safe use. Same as well with allergenicity assessments. There's the protein induce early allergenic effects. It's the same thing that they do as well, like for the toxicity assessments, feed mice, compare the sequences to known allergens, and if it has got a history of safe use as well. Then they do compositional analyses where they say, look, is the composition of the GMO at least similar to its non-GMO counterpart, right? Except for the trait that they try to introduce, right? So they'll measure different kind of things, approximates fiber, amino acids, minerals, fatty acids, vitamins, and so forth, and they compare these to the non-GMO counterpart, right? And because obviously these have got implications on the nutritional value of the crop. So they do these composition analysis, and often these are comparable to the non-GMO counterpart. Feeding trials, they do feeding trials. So for example, they'll take the GMO maize and they also take non-GMO maize and they feed both to chickens and see if the chickens, in terms of their nutrition, is the GMO as nourishing as the non-GMO counterpart, and also will the chickens fed the GMO have any adverse effects? So that often cut these chickens open, look at the various organs in the chicken, and see if there's any tumors or anything and stuff like that, and that's the kind of studies that they do. Exposure assessments, then there are whole studies that go into, they do calculations around how much of the protein, of the introduced protein, does an average person eat, right? And so they'll calculate, okay, how much pap does an average South African eat, and so forth. And then they also look at the temperatures at which these proteins are broken down, right? The temperatures at which these proteins are broken down, especially at cooking temperatures, such that if you cook your pap, right, by cooking the pap, the proteins are broken down, right? And then they also do tests exposing these proteins to the conditions that are similar to the stomach, where there are proteolytic enzymes and the pH in the stomach. Then obviously concerns about the environment. Can these genes be transferred to other plants in the environment? If they are sexually compatible species. For example, in maize, there aren't, because maize originated in South America, there aren't sexually compatible species in the environment. So in the case of maize, for example, that's an easy one. There isn't. Maize will only exchange its genes with maize, right? And then can the protein in the GMO harm non-target organisms in the environment? So for example, if you've wanted to kill a certain insect pest, right, on maize, can those proteins now in maize also harm other creatures, maybe butterflies or and other? And often when the choice of these genes is made, it's because they're quite specific. There's a molecular mechanisms that renders them specific to a certain type of insects to avoid affecting non-target pests. So in all this I've been saying, I've been trying to just illustrate the lengths that are gone through to express and try to come to a point where we say, are GMOs safe, right? And those studies are quite extensive and very expensive. They take a number of years. The application that I mentioned earlier on is an extensive application of experiments done over years for one GMO, done over years, and it's a dossier of hundreds of pages, right? And just to come to that conclusion, in fact, it's so expensive to get to go through that process that in South Africa we don't have a GMO that has been produced in South Africa, right? It's all these multinational companies that have produced the GMOs because they've got the money, and then they're also based here, and then they produce the GMOs in South Africa. And there are many organizations that have done studies on GMOs. Here I've just listed just a few of them that have come to conclusions that GMOs are as safe and nutritious as their non-GMO counterparts. And I need to stress that part, is their non-GMO counterparts, right? That's how safe GMOs are after doing all those studies, right? Let me touch on some myths and facts right? Like I mentioned earlier on, there's some misinformation and disinformation that might be out there. So there's a thing that says that there's a wide variety of GM crops in the market. And I've pointed out that in South Africa, we only have, excuse me, maize, cotton, and soybean. There's no tomato, there's no potato, there's no variety of fruits that are genetically modified on the market, right? So that's important and of course, I mentioned we only have one rice, and one canola variety that is imported into South Africa that is GM. Also, there's a thing that there is genetically modified chicken, beef, and other meats in the market. So no, um, there are no GM meats in the South African market. And it's important to mention, I think something we need to understand that in the value chain of producing food, there are many stages from the farm to post harvest to processing to in your house where you cook it and up until it's on your fork in your plate, right? There are many things that are involved. So post harvest technology, there are many things that people that whether to preserve foods in the processing, there's certain things that happen, and even the way you cook it that have implications on the nutritional value of the food. That has got nothing to do with genetic modification, right? And it's important for us to mention that because people might say, hey, what about chicken that we see in the, what I always see you see chicken in the supermarket that says 70% meat and 30%, I think it's brine or something like that. So it's important for us to mention that there is no GM meat in the South African market. Like I mentioned, there's only GM salmon, and that is in the US, and we don't have any genetically modified meat on the market, right? And also, people that if you think that if it looks too good or grows too fast, it is a GMO. People think you can just look at it. Hey, that tomato looks like a GMO. It looks too good, or it's too big, then it's a GMO. But no, if you use conventionally bred varieties grown under optimal conditions, you can produce quality crop and food. Um, so that the genes from animals, for example, pigs have been introduced into crops. Of course, would understand, well, I don't, but concerns that people might have about introducing genes from certain animals into crops. But anyway, there are no genes from animal origin that have been introduced in crops anywhere in the world. Um, that if livestock eats genetically modified grain, they will produce GM milk, or I don't know what that means anyway, GM milk, meat, and eggs. So no, of course, GMOs or their products have never been detected in milk, meat, or eggs derived from animals fed GM feed. And again, extensive studies are done on these aspects. That non-GMOs are healthier than GMOs. And this has been largely used as a marketing ploy, right? As a marketing ploy to say, hey, they just slap a sticker onto the thing there that says GMO free, right? On the implications to say it's healthier, but actually no. GMOs are as healthy as their non-GMO counterparts, right? GM and non-GMO crops that are on the market are not different in their nutritional composition. That GMOs cause cancer, autism, allergies, and all sorts of other illnesses. And like I mentioned, that now we're approaching 25 years of GM crops in South Africa and across the world, and GMOs have not been shown to cause or contribute to any illness. And numerous studies have been done to this effect. I'll share some links that you can go and also look for yourself. Um, that GMOs harm bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. So the proteins introduced have been tested and shown not to affect bees, butterflies, and other pollinators, and several other factors affect these populations. That GMOs have got a negative impact on the environment. In fact, GMOs can actually be quite beneficial. Like I mentioned earlier on, GMOs allows farmers to produce more on limited land, lessening the impact on the environment. So if you're using less pesticides, if you're practicing no-till agriculture cultivation, there's less soil erosion, like I mentioned earlier on. Now, just to just check my time there, I'm not doing too bad. Um, so some concerns that Christians usually have about GMOs. So one of the major concerns is that GMOs usurp the creative prerogative of God. That by engaging in genetic engineering, we are playing God. And the concern that I have with this concern is that it seems to be only brought up when we are discussing GMOs, right? So I can imagine that you've got cardiac surgeons that take a heart from one human being and put it into another human being, and I'm not, and neurosurgeons, they take pieces of a person's, but they open a person's brain up and they take out chunks of human brain. We always, as Adventists, we like to say our minds are the seat of our judgment, and we go in there and we're tinkering around people's brains. And obviously, we don't have problems with that because the benefits of it are quite obvious, right? And we often don't have problems with that. We've got chemical engineers that, come up with a synthetic, chemicals. Some of them, they are preservatives in our food and so forth. This issue does not come up. So yeah, I'm not too sure about that concern. Then obviously there's this concern about that GMOs interfere with the creation that God pronounces very good. And I think I mentioned earlier on that, yes, the creation was very good before sin came, right? And then sin came, and then creation was defiled. And what we're trying to deal with, through the various technologies, not only in as used in agriculture by genetic engineering, but in other fields in medicine and so forth in engineering, we're trying to deal with the consequences of sin that affected the very good creation that was at the beginning. And some people are concerned that GMOs are unnatural, and this comes from this understanding, that this assumption that everything that is natural is good, which is incorrect, right? If I'll give you an example, if you go pick some mushrooms that grow naturally in the wild, any mushroom, and see what happens, right? If you people in many parts of Africa where people eat cassava, cassava has got cyanide, right? Natural as can be the freshest cassava, if you try and eat it as naturally as possible, you could die, right? So it's a misnomer that anything that is natural is good. And again, there are many things that are natural that we are, our food has got synthetics and so forth. And yeah, to be fair, some people do have concerns with that, but not to the extent that people have problems with GMOs. And I think, and you know, a question that I've often tried to grapple with is, to what extent do we have does our dominion over creation go? All right, because God gave us dominion, right? It says there in Psalms, you've made him have dominion over the works of your hands. You've put all things under his feet, right? To what extent, to what degree do we have a dominion over creation? And is the use of genetic engineering beyond this point? That's a point that we might want to discuss. But I like the concept of dominion with stewardship, right? Dominion with stewardship that says, we've got the freedom to actively mold creation to our needs, right? As long as we are respecting and without harm to creation, right? And then if we're looking at some of the things that I've discussed, then if we violate some of those principles, then there might be valid concerns. And so in fact, our church has actually considered, they've made an official statement, as I'm starting to wind up. They've made an official statement on Christians' principles for genetic interventions. You can go onto the GC website, And you can see this. And what they mean by genetic interventions, yes, includes GMOs, but it also to a large extent includes technologies, genetic technologies in the medical field, things like gene therapy, genetic counseling, and so forth. And some of the principles, I've put the link for that article there, where they establish 10 principles, when we're considering genetic interventions, GMOs being one of them, and that includes confidentiality. And I think this is most of these are in the medical space. Confidentiality, truthfulness, honoring God's image, prevention of suffering, like I mentioned earlier on. If you've got the capacity to alleviate suffering, and this is quite obvious like I mentioned, in the medical space, right, where certain medical interventions using these technologies can be made to alleviate suffering, right? Freedom of choice, having stewardship of creation, non-violence, fairness, human dignity, and healthfulness, right? If so, the church is saying, look, these are the principles that we consider, we need to consider when we're talking about genetic technologies, and perhaps those are things that we can discuss around. And there's an article, there's a peer-reviewed as this is my last slide. There's a peer-reviewed article by Professor David Steen, who's a professor emeritus at Andrews University. Articles he writes titled "GMOs and the Great Controversy" in the Journal of Adventist Education. He says that, but what about the big questions? Are GMOs really safe? My simple, straightforward current opinion is yes. And here's why. The scientific consensus is clear and unambiguous. After reviewing a list of statements by 22 highly regarded national and international organizations regarding GM food safety, I feel more secure about this conclusion. In fact, the president, Ted Wilson, in his question and answer, section he has on the website, he was asked about the question of GMOs, where one of the church members was asking, saying, "Hey, our church, we had a discussion where our church says GMOs are from Satan. What is your opinion?" And his answer was that we need to do research on the topic first of all, and also consider it prayerfully, right? And then he also gave reference to this article by Professor David Steen. And so yes, some useful links. If I can share this presentation if you like, and you can look at some of these things for yourself and others as well. Thank you. I hope I did fine for time. Tandaz, are you there?
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Mahlanza. What a beautiful presentation. I hope everyone learned. I was learning, and I'm not so sure if you maybe we'll ask this towards the end of the lesson about whether you're comfortable enough to share your presentation, or it is what you call this private property or intellectual property, as it were. But either way, we are grateful for the fact that you have helped us to understand more and more about this. At this moment, we now want to be able to start talking. We want to be able to start interacting within ourselves. What are we learning, and what are the questions that we have? So what you simply do is you just lift up your hand through the platform, you raise your hand, I'll be able to recognize you. You can ask, you can comment, you can dispute if you want to, or whatever the case could be. All right, let's start off on that one. So Dr. Mahlanza, just wait on us there. As the questions come through, I'll go through the first round of questions. Maybe if you have a pen and paper somewhere close by, start noting them down. And then after that, you can answer. If anyone else has an answer or other things, we're saying to ourselves, we're all learning and we want to know more about this. And this is something very critical even to our spiritual life. Precious, I'm unmuting you. Okay, I'm going to try that again. Precious. There you go.
Hello. Okay,
Yes, we can hear you.
this is Kuskombozo. I don't know why am I precious here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, first of all, I like the angle that the doctor has taken in presenting this. This is why I just realized that wherever I go, like right now, I'm down in in Newcastle, and like the churches that I go to, presenting on health, they tell me, Uguti, no man, I'm lying. I'm not a medical missionary. They say, Uguti, the medical missionaries, they know they are always at war with real doctors. They are always at war with GMOs. They are always at war with medication. They just want you to take their products that they are selling. But I like really the way the presentation went by. Uguti, it is actually showing us that like this technology that is coming in, it's not really there to harm us. But yes, there are disadvantages to it, you know. But like it's not the intention to harm people. And also to those who love eating meat, especially in Adventists, to those who love eating meat, they will always say, "Yeah, fun. It's the same thing. You also eat GMOs, so we're also eating meat, so it's the same thing, you know." So I've actually been trying to at least to get this information to, I mean, at least to a larger group. Uguti, hey, it's not everything that is GMO. You know, we are not that much developed, especially in Africa. We are not the first world country that we have a lot of GMOs here. Of course, they are there here and there, but like not everything is GMO, especially when it comes to vegetarian stuff. And also those with those who are with GMOs, they are really not they're really not out there to be like to kill all Christians or to give us reasons to continue eating meat. You know, it is good. I guess this is just appreciation. Or with the angle that this lesson came through, it's really the way we should be teaching people, especially those who come up with schools for medical missionaries and make them graduate and make them feel like they are doctors better than doctors. I think they should really listen to this, because we are not at war with medical doctors as Adventists. We're not at war with drugs. You know, we're not at war with even the GMOs. We are actually there for anything that can save life, anything that can prolong life, anything that can help us live a healthier life. Thank you.
Sorry, I just couldn't unmute myself there. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Kumbuzo, for that one. Can I give over to Frank, and then praise comes through. Then if there's a question amongst them, then the doctor will come through. Please note, doctor, there are quite a number of questions on the chat, like a lot of them that I saw. So maybe as the others talk, maybe it's a comment or whatever, also note that, but I'll read some of them. To the Facebook family, I really encourage you to ask as many questions as is possible. I've just sent a message to you, say please do ask a lot so that at least we can learn as well. Frank, you're unmuted.
Hello, doctor. This is Frank. I've got, I think, 3 questions. I was listening carefully, though I was late for about 5 or so minutes since the program began. However, I have got 3 questions I would like to ask the doctor regarding the presentation he has shared with us. The first question is, can we use the GMO maize as seedlings for the next planting season? because the concerns I've come across is that you cannot use that harvest, the GMO harvest, to plant the seed to next season. You have to buy the GMO seed from Monsanto and those other companies, seed companies. That's question number one. Question number two, doctor mentioned that these other products are not GMO, like tomatoes, onions, or whatever. Now, and even fruits. Now the question is, can the doctor explain of the seedless fruits we come across as we buy them in supermarkets and the like? Such fruits like some oranges, you buy an orange, you don't find a single seed. You get to wonder, how natural is this? You see, that's my second question. I had the third question, but just forgot. But let's continue. I will be listening, and probably if I get the chance, I'll ask again. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Frank, for that. Much appreciated. Let's have Upila coming through as well. Upila, you're unmuted.
Can you hear me? My mic usually has a problem. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had a comment first. I'm obviously for GMOs. Pretty sure that's clear on the chat. I just wanted to say I really think that they're very important, considering that we also live in Africa. You know, we're not that well advanced. You know, so it's necessary for most of our food to have as much shelf life as possible, because that, you know, that reduces the stress on farmers and people who really rely on plants and everything. So I think, for instance, with maize, I mentioned it in the chat. I really think that it's important, as long as it doesn't interfere with the health of the population, which the doctor actually mentioned earlier. I also wanted him to clear the confusion between GMOs and the use of hormones, because I think there was confusion on that as well. You said that there is no, apart from salmon, there is no meat that is genetically modified. What is the use of hormones then? Because I'm pretty sure that they do use some sort of growth hormones on meat, because the meat is rather very big. If you eat KFC like myself, the drumstick look very unnatural. So what is that a whole department on its own, the use of growth hormones, and then the genetically modified part of things as well? Please clear that. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Pilasande, for that one. Let me take one more hand, Doctor, then you can come through, okay? I'll take the Van Hedens to take us through. Pilar's complaining about the size of his drumstick from KFC. Isn't the bigger the better? I'm not so sure. I don't know why people are complaining about the size. The bigger the better. Let's go. Van Heden, take us through.
Okay. You said that we've been 25 years using the BT maize in SA. And are we not moving towards a point where we will not have the non-GM maize available? What if after 40 years of using the BT maize, we find that there's something wrong with it? Is it possible to reverse, probably it's causing cancer after 40 years, but we've only been doing research for 25 years. Is it possible to reverse that, or revert back to the non-GM maize? Do you have the non-GM maize stored somewhere so that you could manipulate that one, so to speak, so that it doesn't do what the current variant is doing?
All right. Thank you so much, Van Heden, for that one, Doctor. I'm trying to unmute you now. All right. In whatever order you want, take us through. Give us as many answers as you can. Let's just get more. I'll read some of the questions that came through here as to so that at least the platform can get heated up. Let's ask. Let's not be afraid. Let's learn. School today. School in the Christian circle. Let's go.
Thanks, Tandazo. Let me first point out that you know, in some of the answering some of the questions, I'll go as far as my expertise allows me to, right? And I think that is safe, right? And because, like I mentioned, there are a number of technologies along the value chain, our food value chain, right? From the farm to the post-harvest, to the processing. And so some of these questions might pertain, for example, to post-harvesting, to post and so forth. So where I cannot give, an answer, I might give my personal opinion. I'll say so. I'll start. Let me start with the first question around whether we can plant GM seed for next season. Yes, you can. You can. It's in you are able to plant it, right? And the plant grows, right? But for any seed, especially maize, right, it's not advised to replant, um, to harvest the seed and replant, because in the next season there's a concept called hybrid vigor, right? The harvest of that crop will lose its, you get lower yields, right? That's why it's advisable, even with non-GM seed, right? That's why you find, I'm from Zimbabwe, where politicians every season, they go and give people in the rural areas maize seed, right? Even people in the rural areas have come to realize that even with non-GM seed, you need to buy the hybrid seed every season because you get better yields. It's not to say that you can't. Maybe the confusion comes because one of the companies that I won't mention developed a technology that would make the seed, after you've used it, seed that is derived from the plant, that renders it sterile. It's called terminated technology. That technology was developed, but it was never deployed commercially. So and yeah, within the controversy of GMOs, it has been spoken about a lot that that's this technology has been used by this company, and you can't plant the seed, but you can, but with poor results. So um, yeah, then seedless fruit, not GMO. So seedless fruit have been developed by other breeding technologies, right? Um, which are not GMOs as we've defined. The other breeding technologies, like where they do what is called mutation breeding, where they induce mutations and they select for plants with all sorts of characteristics. And for example, they can select for seedless fruit. But yes, or rather, no, um, seedless fruit is not GM. Right. Then the issue around GMOs and hormones. Um, yeah. So yeah. And this is one of the aspects that is not quite along my avenue, and I'll just give a pointer, right? And if you like, you can get an expert to really elaborate on this. But for example, in the salmon, yes, the actual gene for the growth hormone has been introduced into the salmon, right? So you can have the growth effect by introducing the growth hormone um, gene into the actual organism, or maybe injecting the organism with growth hormones, or I don't know if they introduce it in feed, but it's where we are right now, right? Is that the chicken or the beef, the cows, they're not genetically modified with growth hormones. Maybe they might be fed with or inject with growth hormones. That's another story that is away from genetic modification. Then the issue of do we still have non-GM seed? In fact, yes, non-GM seed is actually still available on the market. So I said 95% of the seed is GM. So if you go some in the rural areas, I go into the farms, sometimes in the rural areas, smallholder farmers, some of them still grow non-GM seed. It's still very much available. Not only yes, it's available in seed banks as well. So all the seeds that we have we have what is called a genetic heritage, right? So we don't lose, some of these genetic resources, if you like. There are seed banks that store some of these important seeds for whatever future purpose we might have. So yes, they're in the seed banks, but also commercially, non-GM seed is very much still available. So I think those are the questions that I had so far. I hope that answers them.
Thank you so much for that one. Okay, a couple of questions from the chat read something like this, okay? So Sharon puts across a very important point here. When she says, is it true that there is an increase of allergic reactions in the world because of GMOs? Because whatever food you're eating, e.g. maize, might contain traces, let's say, of sunflower. Then she adds on to say, and what about the increase in cancers caused by mutations right there? So that's one of the questions that came through. Maybe you can note that. Then maybe one quick one, if you can answer this straight up here, while we can have a dialogue there, so that the person who asked this can hear this. Onesimo says, I saw on the slides a photo with a non-GMO corn. Is that tesonite? Since it's the parent plant that is closely related to corn, but has not gone through a lot of tempering. I don't know if you can answer that quickly. So there was a photo with the non-GMO corn there, and Onesimo is asking, is that tessolite, since it's the parent, something like that. So I don't know if you can answer that. Do you remember the slide?
Yeah, for sure. So that slide was one when I was giving examples of how the genetics of many crops has changed over time, even without the use of genetic engineering. So yes, I gave the example of maize. So maize, like I said, it originated in South America, and the parent, correctly, as Onesimo has mentioned, is teosinte, which was bred from the wild to produce maize. But that is not the implication to say it's the GMO. That's when I was just giving an example of, genetic changes in crops, even without the use of GMOs or genetic engineering.
Okay, cool. That's fine. While you're thinking about Sharon's question about is the increase in allergies due to the fact that there's now so much of GMOs, maize containing traces of flour, bacteria, viruses, and also the idea of increases in cancer because of mutation. Here's one for us here. We're in a Christian platform, and the bulk of us are Seventh-day Adventists. We have been taught the delicate link between the physical body and the spiritual. We speak a lot about having a healthy lifestyle. We are agreeing on drinking enough water. We are agreeing on exercise as well. We're agreeing on a food-based diet. And then apparently, again, we speak a lot about the vegetarian diet. You spoke about GMOs being made, or rather the crops that we have in South Africa that contain GMOs as soya beans. And soya beans are the bulk of the vegetarian food as we know it. We speak about products like vegetarian sausages made mostly from soya, vegetarian burgers, vegetarian what. Those are the primary foods that most vegetarians eat. So here's my question. In line with that, is the health message of vegetarianism still relevant, since now we know that soya beans are much as made of GMOs as probably anything out there? Would you then advise in the context of health that someone adopts a vegetarian lifestyle, or pretty much was still safe eating meat as it were? I know maybe I'm putting you on the spot there, but if you can answer that, that'll be fine. And also, everyone else is invited to answer as many questions as have been asked there. You can go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks. Let me start with that last question. So again, the point, the question that you've asked is fundamentally to do with health, right? If it's GM soy, is it still healthy, right? And because we're talking about our health, and then that's what, for the large part of the presentation, I was trying to come across, because when we're talking about it being healthy, what are we talking about, right? It's again, it comes down to a scientific question, right? Is there something in the food that makes it unhealthy, right? And then therefore, that's when we try to go to the point where we're saying, okay, how does a GMO compare to a non-GMO, a soybean in your fries, soybean burgers, right? And what I try to illustrate, especially showing that process of reviewing each GMO, the considerations around toxicity, allergenicity, nutritional value, and all those things that are done, they come to a conclusion that for a GM soy to be passed on to the market, it is comparable to the non-GMO counterpart, and that includes in its nutritional value. It's equally comparable. So if you are able to eat, at least in a theoretical point, if you accept a non-GMO soy, you should also be able to accept GM soy based on the scientific evaluation of GM soy. So in terms of the health message, it is still as healthy, which is the whole point. GM soy is still as healthy, and we are yet to come to a point where we've got evidence that it's not as healthy. Again, we need to come down to evidence of whether there's any adverse or unhealthy effect that these things might have. And then, yeah, I think that partly answers the question about allergic reactions and traces of all these things, right? And in fact, you will find traces, also all sorts of things in any kind of food, right? Not only GMOs, right? Not only, and that is a point that is not unique to GMOs. But in as far as the allergic reactions to GMOs, it's a valid question because we're introducing a protein, right, into the maize, a new protein that is not previously found in maize. And hence, like I mentioned, part of the evaluation of GMOs is to look at the protein that has been introduced. If you're taking a gene or that produces a protein from a bacteria or from a virus into maize, then we need to evaluate whether it's allergic, induces allergic reactions or not. And those tests are done. And like I mentioned, the sequence of the gene is compared to other allergens there's a whole database of all known allergens. And the protein in the GMO is compared to known allergens. And if it's even closely kind of related to known allergens, then it might cause concern. In fact, in some instances, like for example in maize, in some instances, GMO is actually better. I'll give an example. In like for example, in that picture that I showed you of the maize, with comparing the GM maize, insect-resistant maize, and the non-GM maize, where the non-GM maize was damaged and it had like white stuff on it, right? That white stuff is a fungus, right? And many of you have seen this. If you go onto a farm and you see damaged maize, it grows a fungus because of the damage. And often what happens, that fungi, when the maize gets milled, right, it can end up in your maize meal, right? And some of the fungi actually have things like aflatoxins and in traces that can be carcinogenic, So where you've got insect-resistant maize that is not susceptible to damage and therefore does not get some of this fungi, it might actually be better, right? So traces of these aflatoxins in GM maize might actually be less, right? And that's a problem that is actually there. Cancers, like I said, there isn't any evidence that points to GMOs causing cancer. Like I mentioned earlier on, there may be other factors outside GMOs, preservatives during processing that might be linked to cancers and so forth. But the actual GMOs themselves, through the studies that have been done, like I mentioned earlier, to date, there hasn't been a link between GMOs and cancer.
All right, thank you so much for that one, much appreciated. So we are clear now, as of today, that GMOs are healthy, and in some cases, as you just put across, they are better off in comparison to non-GMOs. The Christian perspective on that, which you put across for us, is How much control should human beings have over God's nature, or rather, how much dominion should we have? So when we can, and I'm thinking that we human beings are students of nature. We can only manipulate what's currently there to the benefit of us, conveniently so. Here's a question that comes from Derek, right, on the chat group. Now that we know about GMOs and their benefits and their non-dangers, Derek says, since GMOs are so much better, number one, why don't we have more of them? I think you mentioned only 3 crops that have them. I think it's cotton, it's soybeans, and I think it's maize. Number 2, why the vehement clarification that we have very few items in SA that are GMOs? Is it not a good thing, even if it is mistaken, to think that there are more GMOs on the market? After all, they are safer and better. Maybe you can give us an idea of what the current trends are in terms of if this is good, so why are we not having more of it? And maybe if it's cheaper, why are we not having more of it here in South Africa? Why only 3 crops when we can have quite a lot of them as well? I think that's what Derek is trying to put across. Maybe you can take us through on that.
Yeah, it's largely to do with the technological limitations, right, that go into producing GMOs. Like I mentioned, we're here in South Africa, research on GMOs were going on since the 80s. In other Western countries, even before that, right? And only in 94 we saw the first, a GMO on the market. It's not as easy. It's not easy to produce a GMO for various technological reasons. Number one, you need to find a source of the genes, right? For example, I gave the example of BT maize where Bacillus thuringiensis. In that case, it was easier because BT had been used before. The actual bacteria had been used. They were applying the bacteria on plants to kill insects, and they simply took the gene, right? So for right now, the trend is to try and get drought tolerant, for example, maize, right? Drought tolerant maize. And to get a trait like that, there are various physiological components involved, for example, for getting drought tolerance in maize. So getting the genes, the right genes, and getting those proteins expressed, that's the language we'll use, expressed, for example, in maize at a level that is effective. So there are many GMOs that, let me use they say die in the lab because you produce the GMO, but it's not effective for it to get to the market, right? And so yeah, it does not reach the market. And the costs in South Africa, like I said, it's quite expensive to go through the process of getting the GMO evaluated and doing all the necessary tests to ensure that it's safe. And so it's very expensive. And if you see the players in the industry, in the seed industry in South Africa, they're multinationals. And all the small seed companies that were in South Africa have been bought by big companies. So it's these big companies that come from outside and buy the small companies. So in South Africa, we don't have the financial resources. There's also limitations around the IP, the intellectual property of these genes. So a company would have discovered this gene and saying that it's ours, right? If you want to use it, you pay us so much, millions, right, of dollars, and people just don't have that money, right? So there are a number of limitations, and the process of actually introducing the gene into the plant is not that easy as well. So yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor, for that one. We're gliding towards the end of our lesson anyway, and just prepared to give us a couple of deliverables. The chat group has been heated. I'm trying to check on Facebook. Let me just see if there's anything on Facebook yet. I don't see anything yet now, but we're really grateful to the Facebook family as well. Right, we pride ourselves as a church that preaches the health reform message. In line with what you just told us, for me, I would speak for me and others can speak for themselves. This is pretty much new in the context of we didn't think, or rather the myth has been GMO foods are unhealthy. We have medical missionaries who some are doing a great job in the church and some are doing not so great a job in the church in trying to give us information that may not be authenticated. We speak a lot about meat. This meat from KFC that Pilar was talking about is genetically modified. They put this and that. And then, you come up with a lot of things right now with the coronavirus. They were telling us a lot of things about just take garlic and ginger, mix that with cayenne pepper, lemon, drink 5 times a day, corona's gone. So all those things that they come up with that are not authenticated by science or whatever the case could be. What is the role of the church now? A church that builds and believes in the health message. What is the role of the church in ensuring that such vital information then goes out? How would you suggest that I've learned this today? So Mtandazo, go after this and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How would that help? What would your suggestion would be in terms of that? Maybe before you answer that, what you think about it, the role of the church in the context of the health message that you just put across in zeroing in and zooming in into GMOs. I'll give the opportunity to Precious. I think Precious just lifted up her hand and she'll take us through. Precious? Okay, let me try that again, Precious. Yeah.
It's me again. It's not Precious. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. I think this part of knowledge should be imparted to to all medical missionary schools. Because hey, those guys are doing more damage than good. They don't know these things. You can imagine someone standing up and say with him, the beef that we eat these days is also genetically modified. So, see how chicken grow 2 weeks and not really unhealthy for you. You see the tomatoes, they are not healthy for you. I think this information should really spread as quickly as possible before we do more damage to our people. And secondly, I'd like to say, in as much as we are trying to make people eat healthy, the things that we think they are healthy, like your soya beans, Russian, I don't know what is that called, but like those sausages, that's the vegetarian sausages, they go through, it's imagine from a soya beans to become a sausage. That process, it does a lot of harm. And also there was a time, I think it was 2014, if not 2015, I don't remember the year, where they discover that like processed meat causes cancer. So basically, what causes cancer? It's the process of it. Now imagine your soya becoming a sausage. The process, it does more damage than good. So instead of telling people to stop eating meat and telling them to start eating your soya bean sausage, I think we should, before we even talk about these things, we should have this knowledge to every institution that claims to train, or every doctors or people that claim to train medical missionaries. They should really have this thing. So I don't know, as a doctor, how can we get this information to a South African church? We may not get it to maybe other countries, but to South African Adventist churches, all of them. How can you achieve that?
All right. Thank you so much. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Precious, for that one. So how can we achieve that and have this information around us? Here's a conclusion that comes out quite nicely, Doctor. Nthokozisa says, so scientific research and application on these food items in the area of GMOs isn't purely evil in its intentions to humanity. after listening to the doctor with a Christian background. Tabiseng says, is it okay then to say the chickens are too big and the cooler fast, like they grow fast, and the tomatoes are too big and the seedless grapes are bad for us and not necessarily GMO? Are we saying since they are not GMO, they are healthy? Okay, let's think about that. Onesimo, the doctor is speaking for GMOs and has cited some research papers. Is it possible to get a link of these papers? I say this because a researcher myself, I say this because as a researcher myself, some, if not most scientific research is driven by where money is. So in most cases, it's important to ask ourselves the question, who is funding this research? Okay, maybe in line with that, doctor, are there any, or is there any school of thought that is against GMOs? So we're very much clear that in the scientific world, there's probably different schools of thought, though certain things go on, but there may be different schools of thought to say, you know what, I hear you, 90% of the scientists say GMOs are okay, but this is our school of thought, this is not working, this is typical scientists like you. Is there any other school of thought that is contrary to what you currently just taught us? And also what Onesimo just put across as well. Let me give over to Van Heden, James White, and then James White, I know this husband of Ellen White, I'm not too sure, but James White is coming through. Van Heden, can I start with James White, then go to Van Heden, then we'll give over to the doctor to summarize for us, answer the questions, the deliverables, and then we can end our lesson. It's been a beautiful one. We appreciate everyone still on the platform. Hang in there. We're about to finish. Okay, Dr. Ellen White, go ahead.
Ngiyabonga Precious, Body Precious. It's typical of Adventists now. Every time we talk about health stuff, that we basically just end up talking about vegetarianism and meat eating. This presentation was basically addressing the genetically modified organisms and what it is, and how perhaps we can help ourselves with that information that we were just presented with by the doctor. Now, the thing is, can we just be sticking to the point? Yeah, the point was, you know, we are safe in South Africa. That's what I picked up. Because the doctor says, Owuti, there's not much of, or maybe there's basically none, except salmon, the fish that he mentioned, you know. So, I can speak for myself to say, anything that is good, too much of a good thing is also bad. You understand? We can be eating meat. You can be eating meat every day, you know, for a fact that having that kind of a diet is not good for you in any case. We are supposed to be having more of vegetables than meat. Even if you are a vegetarian, you are supposed to be having more of vegetables than the processed soy. That is just supposed to be clear with everyone. It's not about say, Wuti, no, we should, I mean, like, we understand the vegetarian diet is actually healthier than the meat diet. I understand. You know, I actually grew up with my grandmother in the rural areas. I understand, and I've come to a realization that one thing, actually, we rarely had meat. You understand? It would take maybe, I don't know, we would have it maybe 2 times or 3 times over, let's say maybe once a month, or it could be basically when a visitor from town comes with meat, and then that's when we would have it. And of course, maybe if there would be enough, my grandmother would can the meat and then would have it later some other time. But normally it's the beans, the veggies, and there's nothing wrong with meat eating. It's not a sin, you understand? But I mean, it's just typical of Adventists. We always just fight over these things. And look at it, what normally Adventists prioritize on, especially when they're eating meat, is basically beef and chicken, and those are the two things. Now, when you look at a vegetarian, they say, but you're only eating this. I mean, like, there's also only vegetarian sausages. I mean, like, it's basically the same thing. Can we just carry this home with us to say, now, for now, we are safe, right? We know that there are no genetically modified stuff in SA. Also, we can basically try to, you know, to maybe just go scrutinize what we eat. We understand. I'm also scared of the things that I see, like, you know, big apples, and like, or maybe I know that normally mangoes are ripe by December or January, and then I see mangoes in September. I'll be like, what happened to this mango? So, you know, I have to scrutinize that. Can we just be logical about things and move on like that?
Okay, thank you so much, James White, for that. Really much appreciated on that aspect. Can we just move on and just acknowledge that we're safe? Van Heerden, you're coming through, you're the last one. And then the doctor's ready to give us deliverables. And I saw a question from Alex and from Chilize as well. And I'll read on that so that at least the doctor can answer that as well. Maybe before Van Heerden, I've already unmuted you, Ne. Let me just read the questions. The doctor, you got your work cut out today. While plant animal GMO seems to be acceptable, what is the doctor's take on human GMO or engineering from the biblical Christian perspective? Okay, you know what, this was bound to come through, all right?
Can you just come again?
Okay. Okay, let me read that one. While plant or animal GMO seems to be acceptable, what is the doctor's take on human GMO or engineering from the biblical or Christian perspective? So that's your work cut out there, doctor. What is your take on human GMO engineering there? Chilizi says, I may have missed the clarification on this one, but the banana we get from Chakuma Fruit Market in Venda, I know Chilizi is from Venda, they're a beautiful place, and the ones we buy in grocery stores are way different. Same goes for the homegrown veggies versus the ones that we buy at the shops. All right. So that pool of, okay, what I grow from my place in Venda is different from what I buy from Checkers or Woolworths. And then the mental struggle of, so am I eating right when I'm taking it from my place at home, or is it okay still from Woolworths? Are they the same? Maybe something along those lines. And Chilizi says she might have missed that clarification. Van Heerden, you're the last one. Go ahead. Van Heerden, you are unmuted. Oh, sorry. I think you muted yourself. Let's try that again.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to say, before we rush and say, people must immediately accept GMOs as a matter of fact. I think there's room for skepticism. I always believe healthy skepticism is fine. And I saw already in the comments, someone says, are there any other research papers that would be against GMOs? And I'm sure there are. And there is reason for people to be skeptical, because in the past, science can be used to cause harm, right? So it's not that everything that science does is and will be beneficial. Sometimes science can be used to cause harm. So that is why people do get concerned, not that it's casting aspersions on current research on GMOs or anything, but there has been issues in the past with science being used to cause harm to people. So people are not being skeptical because they are ignorant or unaware of science. And I would like the doctor to comment on any other publications, perhaps, so that we can have a view from the other side as well to see what are the concerns that even scientists have against GMOs.
All right. Thank you so much, Van Hayden, for that one. Okay, it's up to you, Dr. Tendekai Mahlanza. I hope you don't mind that we're calling you doctor today, because that's what you are, and with the context of what you're talking about, it's easier to call you doctor than brother, because brothers sometimes don't know what they're talking about. So, doctor, take us through.
Thanks, Mtanda. So there's quite a bit of questions. I hope I've tried to keep track of them. Maybe starting with, you mentioned, the role of the church in kind of understanding some of these, particularly the issue of GMOs. And I think we are, some of us, when we came into the church, we kind of understood the church is an evidence-based kind of church, precept upon precept type of thing. And that should not be only, put when it comes to us considering our doctrines and so forth, but also evidence-based understanding of things around our world, right? And like I mentioned, the comment by the GC president to say, first let's research, and pray about it. So the church can play a role in like what you guys have done already. You are part of the church and you are playing a role in having this discussion. So having these kind of discussions more often, and that would help. I can understand maybe the church might be reluctant to have an official position to say yes, we are for GMOs for various reasons, but they can encourage us to and set out principles that can guide us in coming to our own personal decision. At the end of the day, it's a personal decision that you come to based on how you're informed. So that's important. But the bottom line is that let's get informed, and then we and that's also part of like what I think it was Precious about taking this info to the church. I think it's the same kind of thing where we create these platforms and we discuss these questions. I'm not too sure how many churches have this kind of thing where we discuss these kind of topics. Similarly with like the COVID vaccine and things like that. Let's discuss the relevant topics that affect us in our daily lives so that our members can be more informed, and then they can come to a personal position regarding various topics, including GMOs. And yeah, of course, I would agree with Onesimo about in science there are biases, for sure. There are biases, and of course the influence of money in research is real, right? And there are indeed papers. This will probably answer Onispo and Van Heerden. There are papers that and research that has been done that has pointed to GMOs being unsafe, right? And I'll point out two studies that come to mind. There's the very famous one by Seralini, I think it was in 2012, as a professor in Italy, that alleged that GM maize, this is herbicide resist tolerant maize, causes cancer, right? And if you just Google Seralini GMOs, you will find the study. You definitely find the study. And obviously, when we talk about studies and papers and so forth, these are peer-reviewed papers and so forth. The peer review process is to make sure that the study is scientifically sound, the experimental design and how the experiments were done in order to come to a valid conclusion. And the issue with that study was the way the experiments were done, right, did not then lend itself to coming to the conclusions being valid. In the end, that paper had to be withdrawn, right? So that's one example that you can go look at. Then there's another paper. Well, this is probably not regards to food, but on environment. I think this was done at Cornell University, where they said that herbicide resistant maize affected the population of butterflies, if by planting insect resistant, as an herbicide resistant maize, what they were alleging was that um, uh, um, butterfly populations were decreasing because of the primary host of the butterflies being, it's called milkweed, and milkweed, a plant, was being affected by actually the spraying of herbicides. They published that, but in fact, upon further looking into that study, it was noticed that the populations of milkweed and butterflies was already declining before the introduction of GM herbicide resistant maize. And there are a number of anti-GMO groups that are out there. If you just go Google on the internet, you will find there is no shortage of anti-GMO sentiments. And of course, that is similar to the pro-GMO side. The anti-GMO side, they all have biases, right? For example, so you can imagine that you have, now we say the maize is producing its own protein, right? And we're using less and less chemicals, right, in our agriculture. People who have vested interests who are benefiting from the use of chemicals, so they'll feel aggrieved. That's a possibility, and they'll fund, some of the stuff for anti GMO groups. Similarly, the pro GMO will also fund pro GMO kind of positions. At the end of the day, one has to come has to do their own research and come to understanding. Everything comes down to one evaluating the evidence, and some of the evidence out there is quite clearly and blatantly incorrect. Especially on the, at least from my view, from the anti-GMO side, right? The claims are easily refutable, right? So that's my position. The papers are there. You can get a look at that. Then there is the human genetic engineering question. Yeah, so obviously we do not have any human genetic engineering. Let me kind of clarify that. What we have is, of course, I'm not a medical practitioner, but I've got some limited knowledge on that. So they've got things like gene therapy, right? Where, for example, an excellent example is sickle cell anemia, right? They would go and take, so sickle cell is because of a mutation that causes your blood cells to be sickle shaped, right? So what gene therapy is doing is, because the blood vessels originate from your stem cells, right? So what they're doing now is you're able to take out those stem cells from your bone marrow, right? And then correct that mutation, right, using gene editing, and then put those stem cells back, right? And then you are able to produce normal, you know, uh, 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 um, you know, uh, red blood cells, and you're free from sickle cell. And sickle cell is quite prevalent here in Africa. Our genetic makeup lends itself to being susceptible to sickle cell, and that's one form of genetic engineering, if you like, right? Then there's another one which is ethically, where now you want to design, a human to your own desires, right? To your kind of what you want. There's a difference where, you see, the one we are alleviating some this disease, right? And then the other one, we are actually, first of all, creating a human being. So there's a study in China, I think, is it 2 years ago, where they actually tried to work on human embryos, right? And genetically edit human embryos, and everyone was just up in arms about that. And I think in the end, I shared that slide from the GC on the official statements, where they shared some of these principles around, whatever genetic interventions we have as Christians should not violate God's image within us, right? And I guess that's the distinction, right? I'm sure we'll accept that us as humans, we're quite clearly different from plants or animals. That is not to say we should abuse them, right? But you do not equate a plant and an animal to a human. Humans were created in God's image, right? And so there's a difference when you start to tinker around with human beings. You have to give regard to God's image within us. And so yes, there's still, we are not there where we are fully, genetically engineering humans from scratch, but there are some genetic interventions that are there, especially for as therapy to cure some diseases. Um, Let me see here. Oh, I can't read my own writing now. Oh yeah, then the question about what I grow at home seems to be different from what, probably what I see in the shops. Now we need to appreciate that, first of all, you cannot tell a GMO by looking at it. Let's get that clear, right? And secondly, amongst crops, there's a lot of variation. Without even, I kind of alluded to that point. There's a lot of variation. There are a number of varieties, you know. Those who are familiar with agriculture, even maize seed, you can buy, various types of seed. They're different. Some of them will give you tall crops, small crops, tomatoes. Even in the supermarket, you see the different tomatoes. Some are round, some are a bit long, So what you might be growing at home in the vendor, it depends what the variety that you are using. So when you go to the supermarket, and because the supermarket is buying from commercial farmers most of the time, and commercial farmers, they're doing this for profit. They're quite careful in terms of the varieties that they use for profit, right? So they'll probably just using a different variety from what you're used to from home, and they're probably growing them at optimal. I don't know if you take care of your tomatoes as well as you should. Maybe someday don't water your tomatoes, don't fertilize them at the time that you're supposed to fertilize them. But these guys are in commercial. Everything is according to, they know when they're supposed to, fertilize them. The irrigation systems, when they're supposed to water them, it's automatic irrigation systems. The crop comes out quite nice, right? Often than what you might get, in your house. So yeah, it's not because the shops are using GMOs. I'm trying to see if I've left out any other question. And I think the whole meat and a vegetarian. I think I think we should establish. I think it's well established that a vegetarian diet is healthier than a meat diet, right? And that should be cleared up. I'm sure that's well established. And as a church, we do encourage people to adopt a vegetarian diet, because indeed, even I think it was Precious was mentioning, no, it's the processing that makes it unhealthy. Actually, well, yes, in addition to innately the meat itself being less healthy than a vegetarian diet, right? Yes, the processing makes it, especially when it's smoked and all these other processing that they do. Yes, in addition, it makes it unhealthy the way it's prepared and processed. But inherently, the meat itself is unhealthy. And maybe you can invite maybe a food technologist or a food scientist to come and elaborate on what meat is like and the effects it has on your body. That's something else. But yeah, so maybe in terms of my closing sentiments, I'll just echo what I started at when I started commenting on this one, that I think we are an evidence-based church, right? And we should continue in that mold of thinking, be it with GMOs, be it with the COVID vaccine. Just as we search the scriptures to come to the truth, let us also search, the information out there, and we arrive at an understanding that we can make use of and apply in our daily lives, because that's who we are. We are not a people that is driven by speculation. We are not a people that is driven by sensationalism, and definitely not by conspiracy. We are an evidenced, type of people, and we should continue in that mode. And thankfully, we're having this discussion to kind of go along in that mode of thinking, and hopefully each and every one of us here would continue to search for themselves. And like I mentioned, I will make the presentation available. There's some links. I've tried to put links on various places in the presentation where you can go look for yourself and do more searching. And beyond what I've put in there, you can also find further information that will assist you to come to a personal position on this aspect. So thank you once again for inviting me, and I hope that the presentation has been beneficial to all of us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor. We have come to the end of our lesson. Thank you for answering your patients. Appreciate that. Say hi to your family. What we'll do now, I'll give the announcements, 2 of them, 3 of them. Please pray for us after that. As soon as it's done praying, I'm going to close the session on the Facebook page, and also thank you to the Facebook family as well. As of now, I don't think I see any other question on Facebook, but I only see thank you, Ukwalo Uzaba, thank you, Doctor, and I think we're all very appreciative of what you've done today. God bless you and your research and your work and your academics as well. Right now, I'm going to give over to the announcements now. Next week's program. So next week, we have this program. Guess who's coming? Henrietta Coupe. We're trying to bring professionals into all of this. Henrietta Coupe comes in the capacity of a professional, and she is the chief social worker at Lifeline South Africa, and she's going to be talking about skeletons in the closet. Today, we're a doctor, so we're trying to bring context and professionalism to with the speakers that we have there. So please do come through. Then after Henrietta is a month of marriage, and we'll start off with Uzolani, and just going to end there, love, marriage, and divorce. Last thing would be, if you want next week, rather, at 9:30 in the morning, please do come for the lesson. We have a lesson discussion, 9:30, using the same link on Facebook also and on Zoom. So keep this link with you. You use it every single week. We're not going to change it. Unless something happens, we'll let you know. But this is the link that we're using every single time. So please do come through. Don't be afraid for us to ask for airtime. If you want to come through and ask for airtime, really much appreciated. If you want to contribute, our data fund is really going low of late. So this is my name, Umtandazo. Contribute to that. That's my number. This is a South African number. We're well aware that we've got an international community. I think a couple of guys from the UK and also from America and other countries as well. So we really appreciate your presence also in this place. You want to contribute, you can. That's the number. It's a South African number. The dialing code is 0027, then the number. So just keep the 0027 73974. 8498. Ashley, you can also contact him as well, but I'm the guy to go to when it comes to airtime contributions. Now, Upeti just gave us something interesting to say to us. You know what? If you want to talk about designer babies, which is what Alex was asking about, there's a movie called The Island. It portrays such a thing there. Someone talked about a Netflix documentary called What in the Health? I think something like that. Something that we can watch and find out what we're eating and all that. And then I want to read a comment that says, I think perhaps the church should create more funds or grants for members willing to do research on these topics to ensure that you have people who understand Christian perspective being involved in top research. Otherwise, thank you, doctor, and everybody else is thankful. And Mtowas says, I am free today now that I know that GMOs are not that bad. You can pray for us.
Let us pray. Let us pray. Our Father who art in heaven and who is also with us here, we thank you, Lord, for such a time that you have afforded us. We thank you for such a platform as this, where we come together and discuss matters pertaining to our lives, Lord. And Father, we pray that the things that we learn each and every day, each and every Sabbath, especially through this program, Lord, we may implement them, Lord, with wisdom. Continue to give us understanding, Lord. Let your Spirit continue to impress upon our hearts, our minds, things that pertain to your kingdom, things that pertain to our health, things that pertain to our well-being, Lord. That one day, Lord, when you come again, we may be found, Lord, in good standing. Bless the organizers of this program. Bless each and every one on this platform, and continue to work in their lives. Thank you once again for a beautiful Sabbath day. We pray all this in the wonderful and mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. We will close the session on Facebook. Doctor, you are free to go. Please send our greetings to your family. I'm not so sure if you do have one, but yeah, if you do, please do send our greetings. If not, say hi to your books there, and let's enjoy ourselves. Thank you so much. You've been great. I'm gonna stop the live stream on Facebook now. Facebook family, if you want to come through on Zoom, let me just quickly copy the link. After this, we've got what is called After Tears or After Sins, where we just talk generally about the discussion. You don't need to be here, doctor. You can go and rest, but if you do want, you can stick around 5, 10, 15 minutes sometimes. We're now free enough to talk about all these things, and more questions come through in the After Sins. Facebook family, I am quickly sending the link to this topic, or rather to this discussion that we're having now. Then after that, I will close the live feed so that at least we can have only one platform functioning. Please do come through next week, everybody. Thank you. God bless you. You guys have been wonderful. I'm going to close it now.